Turkey's moves in Syria are getting deeper. President Tayyip Erdogan says that Turkey aims to create a safe zone in Syria and wants to extend its military operations to Raqqa, capital of Daesh Takfiri militants. His precondition, if it acts together with the U.S.-led coalition. In this edition of the debate, we'll discuss Turkey's role in Syria and why, despite Syria's opposition to their military aggressiveness regarding safe zones, it still plans to go ahead with those plans. Our guest joining us for this edition of the debate from the Answer Coalition, Richard Becker, joins us from San Francisco. And founder of American Institute for Foreign Policy, Michael Lane, joins us from Washington. Welcome, gentlemen. Michael Lane, I'll start with you. We have Erdogan, while in the Persian Gulf island of Bahrain, announcing a safe zone for Syria. Isn't that another way of saying a no-fly zone?
Yeah, a very curious move that President Erdogan would go to Bahrain to make this announcement. Look, the establishment of a 5,000 square kilometer safe zone has been an objective of Turkey since last summer when they first floated the idea and said that they wanted to accomplish that. What President Erdogan seems to have done in Bahrain is to double down on that and say, yes, we're going to do it. We're going to make it happen. There are a lot of reasons why safe zones are good things. They're humanitarian. They take care of refugees and the war-torn without necessarily having to relocate them out of the country. There are any number of reasons that I'll articulate over the course of the program. But the problem is that you create a mass of people that are very easily attacked, that don't have any way of defending themselves. And anybody who wants to make the safe zones not work can use them as an easy target. So once you do that, what you need to do is you need to provide military support for them, which means a hugely increased ground presence on the part of somebody, presumably Turkey, inside Syrian territory. And also, yes, to make a safe zone really, really work, you do need to have a corresponding no-fly zone. And that becomes very problematic under the commitments that are there today. It remains to be seen what kind of commitments President Erdogan can extract from other players in the region.
Okay, well, Richard Becker, in terms of commitments, who would commit to Turkey's idea? At this point, we've had the U.S. President Donald Trump saying safe zones is the way to go. And Turkey has said, Erdogan has said that this U.S.-led coalition has to agree to this. And there are some reports indicating that it's already been agreed, and even some reports saying that that safe zone, or I should say no-fly zone, has already been established there. Do you think that this is going to work? Or what purposes does Erdogan have behind wanting to make that move at this point?
Well, first of all, I think that it creates a new dynamic in this situation, which is very fluid and could lead very quickly into an escalation of the war inside the country with the different forces that are engaged fighting each other. The idea that the no-fly zone could be created by Turkey is something that is entirely unacceptable, as the Syrian government has made clear that it regards it as a blatant violation of its sovereignty, which it certainly would be. And it is impossible to really go forward with the safe zone and no-fly zone without new acts of war on the part of Turkey. And what the motivation is of the Turkish government, I think that one thing that's very clear is that Erdogan sees the biggest threat inside Syria. He's wanted to see the government overthrown from the beginning of the struggle there in 2011, but regards as the main danger from his point of view, from the Turkish government's point of view, the YPG, that there would be an autonomous zone in Syria that would be a Kurdish zone, and that they equate the YPG with the PKK, and they claim that both of them are terrorist organizations. And clearly, this is what the top priority of Turkey is inside of Syria. And they have a contradiction here with the United States, their NATO ally, and really the lead NATO country, in that the United States has viewed the YPG as the force that's most effective in fighting against ISIS. So while The Turkish government says that its priority is fighting ISIS. I believe that really its priority is fighting against the Kurdish forces inside of Syria.
Need to expand on the U.S. here a little bit, Michael Lane. We know that last month the Pentagon actually was given notice by the U.S. president to draw plans for safe zones. And also, I think it was towards the middle or the 20th of January where Trump actually advocated the zones, these safe zones for Syria, and requested Saudi support for implementing these zones. And now we have Turkey and Bahrain on a Middle East tour, Bahrain being one of his stops, making this announcement. What kind of message is this sending? And I'm pointing towards, obviously, Russia, and perhaps then after that, Iran.
Right. Well, of course, let me start again. It amazes me how in 3 weeks the Trump administration has been able to insert itself back in and make itself a player in the whole process out there. It's just been, after years of President Obama pulling back and not wanting to be as engaged, President Trump has reinserted himself back in. His attempt to have a good liaison relationship with President Putin has certainly been part of that. President Putin has had to give a little bit, but at the 1st of January, Russia and Syria and Iran was the triad that were running the whole thing, and nobody else even needed apply to insert an idea. Well, now that President Trump and President Putin have agreed in principle that we can combine forces in a fight against Daesh, the question becomes, what are the terms, what are the conditions on that? And it looks one of the conditions that President Trump is asking President Putin for in return for a closer relationship is that President Putin reduce the intensity or the closeness of his relationships with other friends in the area, i.e. Syria and Iran. Now, as you look at what could be, President Trump has already said that he is a fan of safe zones. In fact, Secretary Clinton was a big fan of safe zones. She tried to persuade Barack Obama in his first term to go safe zones, and he wouldn't do it because he was much too reticent to provide the military commitment that would have been necessary to make them work. But now that President Trump has said it, now that we have Turkey certainly jumping on board, we have a warning, but it's a very, very light warning from President Putin that says, you really want to be careful because these things may not work out the way you want them to, but it's not a wholesale rejection of the whole thing, the way Syria has, of course, issued a wholesale rejection of the concept, because what's being happened is the country of Syria is being divided up into 3 spheres of influence, with Turkey, Russia, and the United States, if it goes forward in that general manner, and only one of those countries is known to be very friendly to President Assad. So clearly, he has cause to worry. But that's what we're looking at now, is the possibility of that kind of trio of spheres of influence that will provide safe zones for the refugees, which will relieve the international refugee crisis and perhaps provide a continuation of the ceasefire on the ground. All winners if something really, really difficult to do can be accomplished.
I need to ask this question, and it may sound like a repeat, but the reason why I want to ask it, Richard Becker, is because you're having the 6-year anniversary coming up in a matter of a few weeks, way back in 2011, when people who initially started with an uprising was then stolen by these foreign terrorists that then came into the country. We talk about all these different countries involved. Michael Lane just mentioned some, but yet Syria has a president. Iran is advising it by its request and through the invitation extended to Russia. Russia is there. None of the other countries are there by Syria's approval. Why do they feel like they can decide Syria's fate?
I think that they believe that the door was open for intervention on the part of governments that have wanted to overthrow the Syrian government for some time. and that the door had opened for them to be able to intervene and to supply the armed uprising, to not only provide a vehicle for foreign fighters to come in, many of them, many thousands, tens of thousands through Turkey, but also to provide heavy weaponry and all kinds of weaponry and funding to the forces that were fighting the Syrian government, believing that they would be able in short order to do what they did in Libya over a period of several months, and that was to bring down the government. But the Syrian government had a very considerable popular support, especially especially as the program and the actions of the most extreme terrorist forces became clear to the people, and were able to withstand that initial assault when it had very little support from outside, and then to continue the struggle. But clearly, the intervention by the US, Britain, France, Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, particularly important, Jordan, all joined together to try to destroy and bring the government in Damascus and bring about regime change.
Well, Michael Lane, another party that's opposing this so-called safe zones or no-fly zone is the Kurds, these U.S.-backed Kurds. They are against it. Obviously, they're after their own autonomous zone. And also in the south, it would be unworkable because of Jordanian restrictions on movements across the border. So we're back to that U.S.-backed Kurds, and of course Turkey, of which it's a clash of opposites here. Is this thing workable? Are the Kurds, or these U.S.-backed Kurds, going to sit back and have this happen, were it to go through?
Well, that is one of the wild cards. What the Kurds are going to do, are they going to accept it? Look, the Kurds fear a lot more than loss of their autonomous region, which they feel is within grasp. But more so than that, they think the more that Turkey incurs into the sovereign territory of Syria, it becomes more of a direct threat against them, and that Turkey will use that military position to continue to carry on an ongoing military campaign against them, which will diminish their ability to survive. And that's what their real worry is about. But if I could go back to something you asked Richard about and address it, and that is what makes all these countries, and he ticked off more after I ticked off the first 3 or 4, and he got the rest of the Gulf kingdoms and things like that in there. What makes them think that they can have standing to decide Syria's future? I think the world is coming to the understanding that President Putin and Russia have preserved the Assad presidency, that he is not going anyplace in the short term, that he will stay there, and he will continue to be the president of Syria. In return for accepting that, the wild card here and the real decision maker on this is Russia. Will Russia accept a proposal that these spheres of influence be created and be protected by a combination or all of these countries in various geographical areas of Syria? Will Russia accept that as a compromise in return for increased stability? Of course, it diminishes the sovereignty of Syria, but will they pay that price so that there can be cooperation with the United States against Daesh? And that is the real thing. The last thing, let me say, I should have mentioned it in the first part about the Kurds. You know, the Kurds, of course, always thought that it was going to be their plum, you know, their contribution to overall success to drive the Islamic State out of Raqqa. And now Erdogan is pitching President Trump on the idea that we don't need the Kurds to do that, that Turkey will be able to carry the day and in coalition with other partners and things like that. And that's something that, you know, clearly the Kurds are going to have a very, very difficult time swallowing, because that was going to be their contribution and the feather in their cap.
Yeah, well, you know, and of course Turkey doesn't have a mandate, and that came as a surprise that they want to move and go into Raqqa. However, Richard Becker, you know, when we talk about these safe zones or the no-fly zone that, in this case, Turkey wants to go forward with, there's got to be, as Michael Lane, I think, indicated, some kind of force that's going to guard it. And well, Michael Lane said that if I understood him correctly, that Turkish troops may do that. But if they don't, who would do that? I mean, there's some speculations that in order to have this no-fly zone, there needs to be U.S. boots on the ground, something obviously that the U.S. was against with under Obama. And of course, that really costs not only a lot of money for that, but a large number of troops would be required. Do you think that the U.S. has any plans in that regard?
It's hard to predict, truthfully, because of the generally unpredictable character of the Trump administration and Trump himself, and the fact that we know that within the Trump administration at the national security level, there are big disagreements that are going on that are, as the New York Times headline today, the turmoil inside of the National Security Council and the National Security apparatus in general. And clearly there are forces who would like to step up the campaign inside Syria, send U.S. troops in. It will take, will take a significant military force to create a quote-unquote safe zone and no-fly zone, and really does run the risk of vastly escalating the war. There's also the danger that Michael Lane refers to, which I would characterize as the potential partition of Syria, or the de facto partition of Syria, which, of course, the Syrian government is very much opposed to. But I think that right now the situation is very volatile, and that the possibilities of intervention, which were held back on by the Obama administration, despite the urgings of Secretary of State Clinton when she was Secretary of State and others, we've entered into a new period, and we have to see how this unfolds.
Well, Michael Lane, you said that perhaps Russia is the decision maker here in some sense. Is this all about making a deal with the U.S. when it really comes down to it, Michael Lane? For example, we heard news last week from the Wall Street Journal reporting that the U.S. has plans to drive a wedge between Russia and Iran. Is that one strategy? And of course, will Russia go for it? What can the U.S. offer Russia to make Russia, I guess, make a deal on Syria?
Well, I do think that Russia is the ultimate decision maker on this, and so therefore the question becomes, what is in it for Russia? Russia has its friends and its allies in the region. Russia has very, very successfully in the last 18 months reinserted itself into a region with almost unchallenged hegemony in a region where 18 months ago it had absolutely no influence at all. It was not a player. So that's not something that Putin is going to share or give up very easily. So what is in it for Russia? Well, I think you have to look at where are the tensions between the United States and Russia now, and what can President Trump use to entice President Putin to become closer with us, cooperate more with us, with the request being that he be less of a protector of Assad completely and less of a friend of Iran. And I think the only thing that we have, or that President Trump has, that can offer that is, number one, okay, we will no longer contest the Crimea. You got it, it's yours. We didn't do anything at the time. We accept your claims that it was always part of Russia anyway. Case over, you've got it. And then work out some of the differences and the problems that we're having in the rest of the East Ukraine, as well as the Latvian countries. And if we can accommodate everybody's desires there, then President Putin becomes much more interested in dealing with President Trump.
Okay, we're going to unfortunately have to end it there. Thank you. Let me thank our guest from the Answer Coalition. Richard Becker spoke to us from San Francisco, and founder of American Institute for Foreign Policy, Michael Lane, with his comments from Washington. Thanks for tuning in to another edition of The Debate. From me, Cover Taiwan, and the entire team in the capital, Tehran, goodbye.